obviously, last hour we dedicated to impeachment. We're going to dedicate much of this hour to impeachment as well. We'll have other stories we'll be talking about, but this is pretty big stuff. I mean, first off, just like, broadly speaking, it was the right thing to do because you cannot allow this flagrant of law breaking to take place by the president of the United States and not hold him to account. You just simply cannot do it. There is a reason why impeachment exists. If impeachment was not a necessary tool to use and call upon it sometimes, it wouldn't be in the Constitution. And to ignore it, basically, and I think I made this case. We talked about this for the past couple of weeks. The founders contemplated a Donald Trump, right? They contemplated a guy who would use his office to enrich himself in one way or another. They did not contemplate, up until this week, a Nancy Pelosi figure who would refuse to impeach and to say, well, the American public will have a chance to unelect him, or I guess to throw him out of the office. Now, the situation has changed. There's some talk this past week of just focusing on Ukraine and this phone call, which I think would be a huge mistake, not the least of which because let's, transition from what needs to happen in terms of protecting our democracy to the politics of this. People elected Democrats to hold Donald Trump to account for his actions. And the fact of the matter is that this also gives the Democrats an ability to nationalize this race. I think you mentioned this in the last hour, but in every single race across the country, House race, Senate race, the Democrat can turn to their Republican opponent and say, I voted to impeach Donald Trump. What did you do? Or what would you do? And that is a bad situation for the Republicans, right? Because we know how many people support Donald Trump. We know how many people don't support Donald Trump. And the numbers are on the side of normal Americans who don't like Donald Trump.
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't, when you've got a president who has never risen above 45% approval rating and is hovering around 40 most of the time, you are not dealing with someone. People love to compare, this situation to Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998, he was already at the 66 approval rating, job approval rating. People, he had a tremendous amount of support. So his approval rating went up after they impeached him, but that's because they were impeaching somebody who was popular over an incredibly stupid and ridiculous matter that had no business being part of even the national conversation. So, this is a completely different situation. The evidence against Trump is overwhelming. They have a special counsel's report that is devastating in terms of the obstruction of justice that exists there. I mean, this is all, it is a completely different situation. They're fighting the last war on this, and I do blame Pelosi and some of her lieutenants on this because they were around then. I don't know. I guess they think everything's the same, but it really isn't. And I think anyone who wants to run on, I have integrity, I care about the Constitution, I care about this country, the norms, the laws. I am standing up for the rule of law in a time when everyone on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, say that everyone's lost faith in the government, everyone's lost faith that there's any honesty, they're all a bunch of corrupt, jerks. That is not a bad thing to run on. It really is not. It is not a bad thing to say, I had the integrity. And by the way, if you're in one of those swing districts, you can even go to the people and say, people told me I was taking a risk when I did this. People said that this was a very, very, risky thing for me to do, and I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. Now, maybe there are no people in the country who care about that, but, if they aren't, then we've got bigger problems because, that should be a message that a lot of people hear and go, Yeah, I mean, that was a risk. They did it, and they deserve to be reelected because they're honest and have integrity. And, it's better than running on the, well, really didn't know, and Donald Trump, did he really do anything? I mean, that kind of mushiness makes Democrats lose over and over and over again. So, I don't think it's a big risk.
Was it Bill Clinton that had better to be strong and wrong than right and weak, or whatever it is? And I think, going all in on this, I think you're right about it. And I think it also, it eats up a lot of oxygen from the ability of Trump to get out there. And I mean, because look, this election, which I think it's becoming clear, and certainly I think the last election was like this, but I think, and I think we're in for this for a lot more. I think like the conventional wisdom is slowly beginning to sort of realize that our elections are driven at this point, because of the polarization in this country, by negative partisanship. Yep. And the dynamic that took place with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was basically a race to see who could become more unpopular quicker. And as things went on. And unfortunately, Clinton just edged him out in a couple of states, in a couple of states that were unfortunate to do so. And this had to do with a lot of, obviously, there's, I don't want to relitigate this. There's a dozen reasons why Hillary Clinton lost, but one of them surely was that the voting was not just suppressed in these areas, but also depressed in areas, particularly when it came to the presidential line. And part of that was because of Donald Trump is very good at slinging mud. And it doesn't matter how dirty he is. At one point, it's like the Republican Party, like he said, he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. Those supporters are never going to leave him. But frankly, most Democratic politicians, most politicians more broadly, don't have people, supporters who would allow them to shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. At one point, they have a line. And the more you dirty up your candidate, or if you're Donald Trump, your opponent, the better you're going to do, just because you're going to depress some of their voters and they're not going to come out and vote. And by doing something like impeachment, it does two things, it seems to me. One, it keeps the Republicans on the defensive, right? It keeps Donald Trump on the defensive. It keeps each House member, each senator on the defensive. They cannot sling mud. They cannot claim, I guess they could go out there and try and claim like there's no legislation being passed, but there hasn't been any legislation for ages. They couldn't even repeal Obamacare. But it keeps them from slinging mud, and it also discredits them. I mean, the fact of the matter is you're under intense investigation right now, and why should we believe anything you say? So I think this is a wise move when it comes to the presidential campaign. And speaking of which, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about that. And later in the program, of course, we're going to be talking about what's happening with climate change, a report out from the UN, and, of course, a lot of protests around the UN. Speaking of protests, a UAW strike, all this and more. Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back with Heather Parton.